While the mainstream media is obsessing over the latest social media post from the incoming Trump administration, a tectonic plate beneath the North American economy just shifted, and most people miss the sound of the cracking stone. This is not a story about diplomatic pleasantries or casual trade agreements. This is about a calculated, high stakes move by Ottawa that effectively signals the end of the unified North American front against Chinese economic hegemony. While Washington prepares for a universal 10 to 20% tariff wall and a full scale decoupling from Beijing, Justin Trudeau's government has just opened a side door. It is a decision that puts Canada on a direct collision course with the America First doctrine, and the bill for this gamble is going to be paid by every single household from Windsor to Vancouver. What I am about to show you is the hidden math behind Canada's New Deal regarding electric vehicle minerals and manufacturing infrastructure involving Chinese state-linked entities. We are going to decode how Canada just jeopardized its standing in the USMCA, the United Automobile Workers' worst nightmare, and why Donald Trump's transition team is already viewing this as a literal backstab. This is not about free trade. This is about the weaponization of the supply chain. You've been told this is a win for the green transition. It isn't. Stay with me, because by the end of this analysis, you will see that Canada hasn't just struck a deal. They've lit a fuse on a trade war that will redefine the borders of North America. If you're new here, subscribe to Daily Brief right now. Hit the notification bell, because in the hours ahead, this story is going to move fast and the mainstream press is 3 steps behind. Let's go back, not 72 hours. Let's go back to 2018. When the USMCA was being negotiated, the United States inserted Article 32.10, the so-called anti-China clause. It explicitly allows members to terminate the agreement if any partner enters a free trade deal with a non-market economy. At the time, Washington thought they had Canada and Mexico on a leash. They believed the North American fortress was impenetrable. But while the world was distracted by the U.S. election cycle, the Canadian Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development was quietly reviewing applications that would allow Chinese capital to flow into the very heart of the Battery Valley project in Ontario and Quebec. Bloomberg reported it, the Globe and Mail hinted at it, but the structural reality didn't hit until now. The warning signs were there for anyone looking at the data from the Foreign Investment Review Act. The Canadian government began granting national security exemptions to Chinese firms involved in the midstream processing of graphite and lithium, the literal lifeblood of the EV revolution. Insiders at the Privy Council office in Ottawa knew this would trigger a response from the Trump transition team, yet they proceeded anyway. The gap between what the public was told, that Canada was de-risking from China, and the actual flow of capital into these joint ventures is now a canyon. Now we have to look at the economic math. This isn't just one deal, it's a structural pivot. We can break the impact into 4 specific components that are going to hit your wallet. Component 1, the critical mineral arbitrage. According to data from the International Energy Agency and Natural Resources Canada, Canada holds over 15 of the 31 critical minerals essential for EV batteries. However, extraction costs in Canada are 30% higher than in China. By striking a deal that allows Chinese battery giants like CATL or Goshen to provide the processing technology and capital in exchange for long-term supply guarantees, Canada is attempting to lower its domestic production costs. For the average Canadian worker, this looks like a jobs program. For the U.S. Treasury, this is a Trojan horse. If Chinese processed minerals find their way into Canadian-made cars that cross the border into Michigan duty-free, the entire U.S. subsidy framework under the Inflation Reduction Act collapses. Component 2, the USMCA review clock. We are 18 months away from the mandatory review of the USMCA in 2026. Robert Lighthizer, Trump's former trade representative and the man likely steering the ship again, has been explicit. You cannot be a backdoor for Chinese goods. The math here is devastating. Canada exports roughly $400 billion worth of goods to the U.S. annually. If the Trump administration determines that Canada is violating the spirit of the non-market economy clause, they can trigger a 25% across-the-board tariff on Canadian autos. Translate that for a family in Ontario. That is an immediate 15% drop in provincial GDP and the potential loss of 150,000 manufacturing jobs. Component 3, the debt to GDP leverage. The Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, has highlighted that Canada's economy is currently propped up by two things: immigration-led consumption and the hope of a manufacturing renaissance. Canada's household debt-to-income ratio is nearly 180%. They are desperate for capital. Chinese state-linked firms are offering that capital at a time when U.S. interest rates are higher for longer. Ottawa is choosing short-term liquidity over long-term geopolitical alignment. Component 4, the subsidy race. Canada has already committed over $30 billion in subsidies to Volkswagen and Stellantis to build battery plants, but those plants need raw materials. If they can't get them from China because of U.S. pressure, those $30 billion in taxpayer dollars become stranded assets. The running total of the risk here is roughly $500 billion in total trade volume. Stop. Let that land. Canada is risking a $500 billion relationship with its largest trading partner for a niche advantage in the EV supply chain. Let's go behind closed doors. Inside the Prime Minister's office, PMO, there is a faction that believes Canada can play both sides. They see the U.S. moving toward isolationism and conclude that Canada must diversify its customer base. One senior strategist in Ottawa privately admitted that they view Trump's tariff threats as a bluff that would hurt U.S. consumers too much to implement. But across the border, inside the Mar-a-Lago transition meetings, the mood is entirely different. Analysts at the Heritage Foundation and the America First Policy Institute are not looking at this as a trade dispute. They are looking at it as a national security breach. They see Canada's deal as a way for China to bypass the Section 301 tariffs that have kept Chinese EVs out of the American market. To the Trump team, this is a leaky bucket problem. If the bucket leaks in Toronto, you move the bucket. They are already discussing a border adjustment tax specifically tailored to North American partners who don't align their China policy with Washington. This leads us to the consequences cascade. The first domino to fall isn't in the auto sector, it's in the currency markets. As soon as the Trump administration issues a formal warning to Ottawa, the Canadian dollar, the loonie, will likely crater against the greenback. For the Canadian consumer, that means the cost of every imported grocery item, every piece of technology, and every liter of fuel stays elevated even as inflation supposedly cools. On the geopolitical stage, this creates a massive rift in the Five Eyes intelligence sharing network. If Chinese state-linked employees are integrated into Canadian critical infrastructure via these energy deals, Washington will begin to throttle the flow of sensitive data to Ottawa. Nobody in the mainstream media is connecting these dots. They think this is about car batteries. It's actually about whether the 49th parallel remains the most peaceful and integrated border in the world, or if it becomes a wall of economic friction. If this analysis is making sense to you, hit like. It tells the algorithm that structural math matters more than sound bites. We are now looking at exactly two paths forward. Path 1 is the de-escalation path. In this scenario, Canada realizes the gravity of the Trump administration's intent and pivots the pivot. They quietly stall the Chinese implementations, introduce new national security hurdles, and align their EV mineral strategy 100% with the U.S. Department of Energy. This would require Canada to find $50 billion in alternative capital, likely from private equity or U.S. federal loans, to replace the Chinese investment. It is the path of economic pain today for survival tomorrow. Path 2 is the spiral. Canada doubles down on its sovereign right to trade with whom it chooses. They finalize the deals. In response, within the first 100 days of the Trump presidency, Washington invokes Article 32.10 of the USMCA. They slap a 25% tariff on Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos. The Canadian economy, already reeling from a housing bubble and low productivity, enters a secular depression. China, having achieved its goal of fracturing the North American alliance, offers emergency credit lines to Ottawa, further pulling Canada out of the U.S. orbit. This is the path of structural transformation, where the North American continent is no longer a unified economic bloc, but a fractured zone of competing interests. The single variable you cannot control is the ego of the leaders involved. This is no longer a negotiation between economists. It is a clash of worldviews. On one side, a Canadian leadership that believes the world is still multilateral and rules-based. On the other, a coming American administration that believes the world is a zero-sum competition where you are either with the superpower or against it. As we look at the widest possible lens, understand that what we are witnessing is the Finlandization of Canada. For decades, Canada enjoyed the luxury of American protection with the freedom of globalist trade. That era is over. The math doesn't support it anymore. Whether you are a factory worker in Windsor or a tech entrepreneur in Vancouver, the deal Canada just struck with China has put a target on your back. The U.S. is not going to allow its northern neighbor to become a backdoor for its primary global rival. I want to hear from you. Do you believe Canada is right to diversify its trade away from an increasingly protectionist U.S., or is this the greatest strategic blunder in Canadian history? Does the Trudeau government actually have the leverage to stand up to a Trump-led trade war? I read every single comment. This is Daily Brief. Subscribe if you haven't. The story isn't over. It's barely begun.